Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Frostbite. Welcome back to another episode of Ships on Coins. Today, we're going to be talking about the 2023 American Innovation $1 coin. Now, as you can see, we see the familiar obverse, which is the Statue of Liberty holding the torch, the $1, and In God We Trust. But the item I want to talk about today is the reverse. And that is the Higgins boat. Now, this is an American innovation that undoubtedly changed the course of World War II. It's this innovation that allowed us to put men close to the beach without jeopardizing our naval fleet. This was paramount in our ability to overcome the bed-in that was done at D-Day at Normandy. Now, in order to understand the innovation, you have to understand the man behind the creation. Now, the man behind the creation was Mr. Andrew Higgins. Now, Mr. Andrew Higgins was born in August of 1886 and died in August of 1952. He was a Louisiana boy. He was born in the bayou. And because of this, he had an innate understanding and ability of what needed to occur for a boat to operate in very shallow waters. He needed to have something that allowed him to get stuff on and off with coastlines that were often inundated by reeds and water. So in 1930, he created what was called the Eureka. Now, the Eureka was a fast boat that looked like the Higgins boat, but it was shallow, it was small, it was maneuverable, it was rugged, and it was fast. And because of this, the U.S. Navy caught wind. And they had a lot of competitors who were trying to build something like this, but were not ultimately successful. So they went to Mr. Higgins and talked to him about his invention. Now, Mr. Higgins was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and he holds 2 patents. One of them is this particular boat. Now, let's talk a little bit about the adjustments that he had to have in order to go from the Eureka to the Higgins. Now, there were some things that had to be added. So there had to be some machine gun mounts that had to be put on the sides. The walls had to be raised up a little bit higher so that it provided some protection for the troops or the vehicles that they would be taking. Instead of a single motor, they had to do dual outboard motors on the back. They had a pilot's nest on the left-hand side that allowed for piloting the vehicle. And they had a ramp on the front of it that would allow for raising and lowering to get stores, personnel, or equipment on and off. You could even throw a vehicle on there. But because of the changes that needed to be made, there were some vulnerabilities that were had in the boat. Now, we're going to talk about those in just a moment, but I want to kind of show you a few examples of what this ship looked like, what this boat looked like during its use in World War II. So the first image you'll see here, you'll see troop transport. So you'll see the people coming off, and you can see it's a fairly flat surface transition from the Higgins boat to the beach. Now, as you can see here, there was no preventative measures on this portion of the beach. There were no logs, there were no cement stakes, there was nothing to catch the boat in this particular area. So in this configuration, it worked just fine. However, there were adaptations that had to be made in order to overcome some of the defensive obstacles that would be had. One of those was the front gate. Now, as you can see in this particular picture, the front gate was just over the head of the troop in front. Now, this wasn't a problem, except if you had somebody that was banked up high on that hill. So, for instance, up there at the top of that particular hill, they had a downwards vantage point, so they could actually snipe people out of the boat. So in order to protect that, they needed to have a taller ramp. So that was one of the adaptations that they did. But that ramp would serve other purposes. As the Higgins boat would come close to the beach, it would allow them to get a little bit further away, avoiding things like cemented logs or barricades that were in the beach meant to strand the Higgins boat. Now, as you can see in this particular image at the front of the Higgins boat, you see a much taller area there, and that was built higher, and that allowed for a further distance to be covered when that drawbridge dropped for the vehicle or the man to get off and on. Now, this also caused some variability and vulnerability within the system itself. Now, I'm going to show you another image. This is a portrait that was done, or a painting that was done regarding the Normandy invasion. And if you look at the ship on the front, you're going to see it full of troops. Now, one of the vulnerabilities of this particular item was that if a mortar landed inside of here, because of the height, now the walls would come up to the standard man, up to their neck or their face line. And because of this, it was very difficult when you were carrying your full gear and your weapon to get out. So if something happened and a fire started or there was an explosion, it would be very difficult to get out of the boat. If the boat started to sink, it would be very difficult to escape. The other thing is, because the drawbridge was so high, it took longer to lower. So as it lowered, it left the men in the front a little bit more vulnerable to machine gun fire. And this was often the case. As you can see in the depiction on the far end of this particular shot, you'll see that the Higgins boat is caught on fire. Now, this did a couple different things. Number one, it would, obviously the people inside would be in trouble, but because of its maneuverability, the person could actually kick the boat in reverse, and then it could actually be removed from the beach, allowing a spot to open back up. Now, sometimes they didn't want to remove the boat from that particular position because they knew that they had a mortar that was already sighted in to that exact spot. So sometimes they would just leave the boats there and then work around it. The other thing is that it was very thin armored because it was light and it was maneuverable. And because of the thin armament, it meant that bullets often penetrated the hull and would hit the soldiers that were there waiting to get off. Or it would hit equipment, igniting the equipment in its stead. But by far, more people landed on these boats than were sacrificed in them. Now, many men died without ever getting off the boat. Many men died without ever seeing the beach because of this particular vulnerability that was in this design. But in the countless thousands or hundreds of thousands of men that were deployed, the jeeps, the equipment, the tanks, things of that nature that were sent from naval ships to the shoreline far outweighed any vulnerability that was had within this particular craft. Ladies and gentlemen, we talked about the Higgins boat. I hope you enjoyed this. This innovation definitely changed the face and the direction of World War II. It led to the victory at D-Day, and you'll understand now why it's one of the coins on the American Innovation set. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this. This is Frostbite. Have a wonderful day.